Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for making time to attend Home Credit Philippines pilot episode of Cyberclass 2020. We will be hosting a series of tech talks online so as to support continuous learning, even we are staying at home. So for this session, um, the team has chosen to have a topic for business analysts. And I was thinking that originally, design thinking is done mostly by UX designers. So we want to look at it through the lens of a business analyst. Okay, so there are a lot of people online tonight. So thank you very much again for attending. And I've checked the list. There are actually, yeah, a lot of people, and some are from other countries. Um, some are from Japan, Singapore, Malaysia. From the attendee list, there's a student from UK. Where else? Oh, China, Vietnam, and yeah, we also have viewers from there. And of course, hello and good evening to fellow Pinoys. We've been staying home for quite some time now. Hope you are all safe and healthy. And all right, without further ado, if I haven't mentioned your country, by the way, you can place it on the live chat below. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce myself. Okay, so I'm Berlyn and I'm currently a business analyst in Home Credit Philippines, and I took my undergraduate studies in UP Diliman. It was computer science, so I was more coding level technical back in the day until I transitioned recently on merging tech and business. So after graduating, I worked and I entered Samsung R&D Philippines, and I worked there as an Android developer. And I also did technical writing. So let me just adjust my screen. I think I'm covering most of the slide. So I also did technical writing, and I was also a Korean technical translator. And lastly, I also became a regional technical account manager for Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, for Samsung Security Solution. And after that, I worked in Yondu as a technical solutions consultant. And that is before I transferred to Home Credit, where I work as an IT business analyst for CRM solutions. Alongside, I went back to UP, and this time I'm taking a management course under the Technology Center, and I'm on my second year on technology management. I've also recently joined a the first business analyst community as a founding member, and I also help with the content management. I'll actually be discussing more of that organization later. So, if there are business analysts or people who want to be business analysts who want to join the group, I'll be discussing how you can join later as well. All right. So much for me. Let's walk through the items that we will be discussing tonight. Oh, right. I also do other speaking engagements. Like, I've joined DevCon when I was with Samsung, so I've discussed security solutions. I joined Women Tech Makers last 2018 and 2019, discussing on the Google Cloud Platform solutions. And recently, I also did a talk with BA Philippines. All right, so for the items that we will be discussing tonight, let's get everyone on the same page and define what design thinking is. Look at the processes, the phases and see how the designers think. And then let's place it in the context of agile. I believe that most in the audience have knowledge in agile, and based up on your sign sheets, most of you have worked in an agile environment as well. And then after that, let's discuss how business analysts can apply design thinking, um, and we are also going to check on some tools and techniques that we can use. And by the end of this, I am going to give a little bit of activity. I hope that I, I can't check the chat right now, but I hope most of you can contribute and participate in the activity that I will be doing. Okay, so let's define first what design thinking is. Okay, so design thinking is defined as a way of solving problems that are human centered, meaning that it considers the experience and satisfaction of end users. It basically seeks to understand people's needs and come up with effective solutions to meet those needs. This is what they call the solution based approach on problem solving. So, design thinking actually started in Stanford University in the USA. And it was spearheaded by a David Kelly. He's the one in the picture. And he is also the founder of Stanford Design School and IDEO. It is a company that trains other multi-billion-dollar companies to apply design thinking as well in their processes. And Kelly believes that great design thinking is needed by the next generation innovators, and he also believes in iteration. And one of my favorite quotes of him is the second one that, if you could see it right now, it's fail faster to succeed sooner. So it's all about the feedback and applying those feedback and apply the improvements. So a while ago, I've mentioned that the design thinking is a solution based way of thinking rather than a problem based way of thinking. Let's see how they're different. Okay. So while you are reading the list on the screen, I think my broadcast is on a bit of a delay. Okay. So while you're reading through the differences of solution based thinking and problem based thinking, I would like to share a story on how these two are different. So, in the University of Sheffield, a professor of architecture tried to do an experiment with scientists and designers. So, what he did was he set a task where both teams should lay different kinds of blocks of different shapes and sizes, and the perimeter of the structure to be used should be maximized. So you have to use the maximum number of blocks to cover a certain perimeter. And surprisingly, what the engineers and the designers did was totally different. So Lawson published his findings on his book How Designers Think, and he observed that scientists focused on identifying the problem, while the designers prioritize the solution that is needed to be done. So what the scientists did is that they do all the calculations, they calculate the number of blocks the size of each block, and then did some mathematical computations on how to maximize the placing of each blocks. On the other hand, the designers, what they did is they just got a random set of blocks and then placed it on the perimeter. And then if they see that the certain item or the certain block does not fit well, then they would just get another block from the pile and then replace it. So basically, design thinking is all about iterative processes, meaning that they have to choose the most ideal solution possible until the favorable solution is found. Okay, so we saw that engineers and designers do a different way on approaching things. So let's dissect how do designers think. Alright, so design thinking is based on four principles. That is the human rule, the ambiguity rule, the redesign rule, and the tangibility rule. So let's start with the leftmost image, which is empathy. So this is where the human rule enters, meaning that no matter what the context of your problem is, all design activity is social in nature. So humans always interact with whatever system you are doing. So this means that we have to place them in consideration when creating the solution. So this brings us back to the human-centric point of view, which is the main concept of design thinking. Next is go wide, or in formal terms, they call it the ambiguity rule. Ambiguity means that there are a lot of possible solutions that can be available. So during brainstorming, you should be open with different options, and there are no wrong answers or suggestions. And alongside that is, while having all these options, it's important to do experimentation, which is on the third image. So for the experimentation, you have to do prototypes. We're gonna look at that later. And all the ambiguous items that you have considered as solutions, by experimenting them, you would see on how to improve them. And then by redesigning, you would tweak little items or big items, so as just like what the designers did, is that they do small iterations of improvement so as to fit and find the ideal solution. Okay. And lastly, we have diversity, or the tangibility rule, meaning that all solutions should be considered, and of course you need to have a tangible or something to be tested by the users. So if you have questions, just place them below, and then I'll look through them later. Okay, so what is involved in design thinking? It has four different phases actually. First is we empathize, meaning that we understand what the users want. Next, we define what is their problem. We ideate, prototype, create a prototype, and do the testing. So empathy is actually the start of everything, because this is the first stage where you spend your time getting to know the user. You would want to understand their wants, their needs, and objectives. And this involves observing and engaging with other people, meaning the people that is outside your team, the people that are actually using your software. You would want to involve them in the process as well. So after you've done that, you want to define the problem and see what are the pain points of the users. So this was also done in Stanford, and let's apply it, or let's look at it in a simpler way. It basically answers who, what, how, and why. So the empathize and the define part, the empathize part answers the question who are we solving, or who are we creating the solutions for. Next is it answers the what part. So define, create, and ideate identifies the needs of the users. And then the ideate, prototype, and test basically answers the how part, on how we will solve the identified problems. Professor Kelly also grouped these two items into two major parts, where empathize and defined is one, and ideate, prototype, and test is the second part. Okay, so first let's look at empathy. Empathy means that you have the ability to understand and share the feelings of one another. Okay, so there is a thing called empathy mapping. This is usually done when you go out on the field and meet your customers, meet your users. And then you ask them what are their pain points, what do they usually do, what do they need, and what do they want to see in your application. And basically, when you talk to them, as humans, we don't say everything that we think and feel. So if you could see on the diagram, there are four quadrants. Say and do is the say and do is the main part where we receive it directly from the users. But the think and feel part, it includes all the other feelings that the user has, and it's not necessarily communicated to us. So part of empathy mapping is doing intuitions or guessing, um, and this is going to be used in the experimentation phase. So you process whatever the user says or does, and then you combine a little bit of creativity to imagine what that user is thinking and feeling. And that's where the empathy goes in. So, frameworks for empathy, this is also provided by a professor in Stanford. Um, First, you have to observe behaviors. So, usually when collecting data, we just do surveys. But for design thinking, doing surveys is actually discouraged because the answers on the surveys are actually skewed by the way you relay your questions. So it's better that you go on the field and you observe. Next is after observing, you may want to interview users. Not everyone, but you want to choose those who could give necessary inputs. So, for example, if you're in the context of a grocery, um, you're doing an application or grocery, and it's actually an activity later, you may want to interview those who are doing the actual processes, the ones in the cashiers, the ones who are letting the people inside, the ones who are stocking the shelves, um, so as to understand what the real process is. Next, it is also important to understand for meaning. It means that we have whatever solution we create or whatever insights we take, we have to make sure that it gives value. Okay, so someone is requesting that these slides can be shared. I can post the link of the Google Documents on the comments below so you can have access. Actually, I will be also sharing all the references and the tools that can be used later. And lastly, before I go to the next slide, it is also important to implement new behaviors. So after all the observations, you have to apply them with your solution. Okay, so next part, after we have collated the data from the immersing and the talking with our end users, we need to define the needs and insights that are significant and could actually give value. And this stage is dedicated to defining the problem. So after you've defined the problem, you have a list of things that you want to solve now. This is where the latter part of the phases is going to be involved, which is brainstorming. So brainstorming basically is you talk with everyone else and you generate ideas to solve a design problem. The next slide that I will be showing is this is actually a slide taken from one of the reports from my classes in grad school. So basically what this shows is the innovation part of a company. So you have here on the left side, let me break it down for you. So what you have on the left side is the hardcore sciences. So these are the basic concepts that everyone knows. Everyone knows that when you declare a certain variable and then when you store it, all the programming languages, that's like the core concept on programming. If you would go on the next part, the design configuration, this is where these concepts become unique to your company, which is the demi-core. meaning that there are certain features that your company has that apply these hardcore sciences. So, for example, whatever company you may be, you have your own application, you have your own website, and you have your own way of implementing them. And if you would look at this one, the curved part, the semicircle that is not enclosed. Um, okay, so this one is the market environment, meaning constant interaction with your users or with the market is very important. And there is this protective belt which provides freedom to improve the artifacts or the finished products that you release. Okay. So basically, what this innovative diagram shows is that there is an importance for your internal team to interact with the external market so as to create or to give out something innovative. Okay, so after you've gathered all these concepts and you have created and narrowed down a simple or a basic solution to whatever you've identified as a problem, it is very important to do prototyping and testing. Because, as mentioned a while ago, the main process of design thinking is that the users should have something tangible to work on with. Okay, so what's important in doing prototypes? First, you can create interactive wireframes or mock-ups that the customers can use. And then you let them use it and you gather feedback. Whatever feedback you have, you relay it back to the team, and then you incorporate them during meetings, and you apply all the changes continuously. So, as on the fourth bullet, UX designers are your friends. So, business analysts, all the companies, UX designers are very important. You can collaborate with them, ask them to create wireframes and mockups for you, and they would also suggest improvements on the user experience. And lastly, it's important to keep whatever solution you have simple so as not to confuse the users. Okay, so these are the phases that we've just discussed on design thinking. It's not a linear process. As you can see in the diagram, when you start empathizing and defining and ideating and creating the prototype, it's not necessarily that you go directly to the deployment part. There are sometimes that there are not so good feedbacks on your design, so you would have to go back to the ideation part, or probably the items that you have defined are not the actual problems that are needed by the user. So you would have to go back all the way to empathizing and do the whole process all over again. After all, the main purpose of design thinking is iteration and continuous improvement. Okay, so we've had an overview of the design thinking, its phases, its processes. How can we apply it, or how is it related on the agile context? Okay, so a quick review on agile. So this is actually a nice illustration by the Nielsen Norman Group. So a quick recap on what we do with agile. We have a list of tasks or stories that are piled up in our backlog, and every week, every 2 weeks, or every month, depending on how this goes for your company, how you do the implementation, you get a couple of those tasks depending on the team capacity, and those that are going to be placed on the sprint, they're going to be implemented and tested. And this process goes on and on until you finish all the items in the backlog. But let's be honest, we never run out of backlog items. Anywho, going back to the illustration in the slide by the Nielsen Norman Group, this is a really nice illustration. They've compared the series of sprints into a light illuminated by a flashlight. So, the items that were illuminated by the flashlight, the items near the flashlight would be very bright and clear, meaning they're already defined. And those items from afar are not very much defined and you don't know the details yet. But as we iterate on the next sprint through backlog groomings and meetings with the customers and the development team, the items get clearly defined little by little. So, as I've discussed a while ago, so the items near your flashlight or the current sprint, all of those items are clearly defined. While the items from afar, you need to do more empathizing, more understanding of the business opportunities first. So let's map the five phases of the four phases of design thinking to our sprints. Okay, so since we still do not know, or since the initial phase of design thinking is to understand what the user needs, so empathize, meaning that we cannot implement it immediately. So this goes to the future sprints. Next is when we define the problem, we still cannot implement it. So the define phase would go still on the future sprints. For the ideate, these are the things that is starting to get clear. Actually, you can place it on the upcoming sprint or the next sprint depending on the clarity of whatever you've come up with your team. And it goes to cycle with the prototype and test. So just like what I've discussed a while ago, it's important to ideate, prototype, and test. So it's a cycle. And as you go through the process, the requirements get more refined. And as soon as it gets refined, you will reach the implementation phase where you are on the current sprint. Okay. So as I've been mentioning a while ago, it's a continuous process. So this is the one you're seeing at the screen right now is a combination of design thinking, agile, and lean. But I didn't include lean in the discussion right now because it would take a lot of time. But basically, your design thinking would continuously iterate throughout the agile processes. You would include it in the planning, you would include it in the backlog grooming for refinement until the items get clear, and then when it gets delivered to the customer, they would give feedback again, and then you would refine it continuously and iteratively. So IBM has their own way. They've created their own way of design thinking. I can also place the link of the references below. But I really like their concept where they treat everything like a prototype. So there is no finished product. And there is no finished product. And it's something that always go in iteration. And it's something that is always reinvented. So how do business analysts apply design thinking? Okay, so when I check the attendance list, I think not everyone is a business analyst. So let's define first what do business analysts do. First, we facilitate the solutions for stakeholders, meaning that we talk to the end users on what their requirements are. So it's more of the empathizing part. Then we also elicit information. So it's also part of the define and empathize part where we would go to the users and actually talk to them with what's their problem, what they need, and what they're experiencing. Next is we also model the requirements. And Lastly, we validate solutions. So this is an interaction between the stakeholder and the development team. But not everyone has the title of business analyst. So it's not necessarily that. There is a lot of other things that you are probably doing, but you're not formally a business analyst, especially for lean organizations or startups where you have to do a lot of roles or yes, yeah. I know it even not being a business analyst. Yeah, not necessarily, but yeah, there is a lot of hats that you have to play, especially if you're working in a startup environment. Um, this is just a long list. Okay, let's get through one by one. So we communicate software requirements. Testers do that. Developers do that. Project managers do that. Everyone does it. So this workshop is not necessarily for business analysts only. This is applicable to everyone. So when you communicate software requirements from business and to business, when you discuss the functionality expectations, when you prioritize items, the must-haves and the nice-haves, and then you communicate it back to the IT team, do clarifications, um, identify any inefficiencies on the waste so we can map it as well on the defined part or the defined phase of the design thinking. And yeah, you also determine ways to improve a process. So this goes on the iteration phase and the prototyping phase because when you ideate and prototype, you will identify the points to be improved. Implementation phase, of course, you implement change. And then when you track the results of change, this is also part of the feedback. Yes, it's very important to give value to the customers. So everything here, it's not necessarily that business analysts are the only ones who do this. Okay. So this was discussed with one of my talks before. Given that design thinking doesn't limit you on what process you do, on whatever way you create the solution, as a technology implementer, it's very important to be technology agnostic. What does being a technology agnostic mean? It means that you are not biased towards the use of technology tools that you will be creating. If you could recall the illustration I used when we were defining the difference between um, the problem-based thinkers and the solution-based thinkers. The solution-based thinkers deal with whatever they have and just continuously improving. While the scientists, I'm not saying it's a bad technique, but they did all the processes strictly. They did all the calculations before they actually um, do the implementation. And as Kelly said, it's good to fail faster to succeed sooner. So as soon as you have your minimum viable product, something that is working, it is important to have it tested already and then continuously improve it. And little by little, that's where you would see how your small solution would give bigger value and bigger solutions to the customers. Uh-oh. I think I might have a network issue. Am I still online? Okay, so I would just continue maybe. Okay, I'm still online. Thank you. Alright, so it's also important to have a proper mindset. This is one of the things that is very important when implementing something on your with your organization or with your team or with whoever or whatever role you have. It's very important to have the proper mindset. Okay, it's very important to have the proper mindset. Because, just as a Stanford professor puts it, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, whatever strategy, whatever process you have, whatever um, process improvement you want to implement, it's very important that you have the support of your organization. And it should be a way of thinking, a way of living that is aligned with everyone in your team. Okay, so actually, this is faster than expected. I'm already on the last part of my slides. So, what are the tools that we can use when we want to implement design thinking? Um, First, okay, how do we start? So, here are a list of items that is very useful when you want to create an empathy map. If you could remember a while ago, empathy map considers what the user thinks, what the user feels, as to compared to what they are saying and what they are doing. So it considers all facets of the interaction of the user with the system and his way of thinking. So there's a tool called Creatler. So you can create empathy maps. It looks something like this. Oops. It looks something like this, where you would like to take notes on what the user thinks. So you can bring this along when you're doing an immersion with whatever application you're doing. And then it could be helpful if you define a persona. So um, basically, this means that you would create specific users that have certain personalities, certain requirements, certain age group. Okay, and then you can also create prototypes. I will be posting the links as well for these tools so you can try them. So this is a mobile application where you can drag and drop items so you can quickly create a prototype. And lastly, this is a very interesting testing tool where you create when you create websites, you can have the user test it, and then basically this traces all the interactions and the series of interactions that um, the user does on your website. So there is an analytics and feedback tool that enables this application to collect data and then funnel it everything, and then you would be able to see if your button is placed correctly, if your font is too big or too small, if the user zooms it in. This is, I believe, a freemium type of application where the basic features are for free. And then this one offers an instant feedback from the users, and you could also create polls from this tool. Okay, so we've discussed the tools, going through all the phases. I would like to discuss a couple of techniques that you might want to consider. So, value chain analysis, this is actually a framework used by different enterprises. So, basically, this diagram shows all the necessary activities that support an operation. That support an operation and the product per se. And basically, this diagram examines how an organization interacts with their partners, their manufacturers, if you are coming from a uh, manufacturing company or a food company, and then it would also consider how you would transport your products and how would you do marketing and sales. And this one also tracks the cost that you are spending per activity and per support activity. Recently, in one of my classes, I've done a simple analysis on how the value chain affects, or how our current situation or the new normal affects the value chain analysis. And basically, the support activities, if you could see, technology development is part of it, but right now, technology became a major player, um, especially when we have to work remotely. Right, so this is one of the techniques. You might want to, when doing design thinking, you might want to go through all these partners, through all these support activities, and do immersion with them so as to understand everything. Next is you can do mind mapping as well. So mind mapping is used to represent on how ideas and other items are linked to essential ideas. So what you see in the diagram or on the sample right now is how can we focus in the age of distraction. So you would see all the related items that are directly related or not, and then you can just branch out everything. Usually it's fun to be done with a group so as to see how the discussion grows and how creative people can be. Okay. And maps are also very helpful when we generate and visualize all the other items. Okay, next is journey mapping. So this is also another technique that you want to use. So this is a tool where you would track the customer's journey as he or she interacts with the organization, and it traces all the experience of the customer from the start of um, their interaction up to the end, up to the decision making. So this is usually used to identify the needs of the customer. So if you want to add a new feature on your application, then you would probably want to do journey mapping. Lastly, is customer co-creation. This is one of the key techniques of IBM, where they would include the customer or the user in the process per se. And so, for example, there is a technical team and they are told to create a digital cockpit. So, given that they are very skilled only on programming but don't have enough experience on the aviation part, usually what the company does is that they hire a pilot or someone who is knowledgeable on that field, and then that person joins the team as a consultant, and then they create the solution together. And lastly, for our activity, okay, I've created a scenario where you are working in a company that owns a chain of grocery stores, and your team needs to identify new ways to be able to serve more customers because we cannot go out. And of course, some of the items that you would want to consider when doing the design thinking is how will you do it with social distancing due to our context, and use it to come up with creative ways to improve your mobile or web application. So I've started, or I've done the first part, which is you empathize. So using the tools that are available right now. So first, I would suggest to do Zoom calls to interview certain consumers of different classes, so as to consider what are their pain points, what do they need, and then you can also visit local stores or your local branches and do the actual observation on how people go around your store, what do they usually need. This could be the information here could be used as the feature items for whatever you're gonna place with your website. um, you can also consult with grocery staff on their everyday experience. So, like, um, ask with them the number of customers or the volume or the hours that majority of the customers or the consumers go in the store. And lastly, you can also talk and interview with suppliers on their product logistics. So, you might want to consider this if your customer would like a home delivery for their grocery shopping. Actually, I would leave the rest of the phases for you as homework, or you may want to discuss it here in the live chat. You may also want to suggest on how we can empathize. So I'll just go back to the previous slide so you can see what's our requirement. So it's a grocery store that wants to reach more users or more customers, to service more customers despite the quarantine period. Um, this is actually the end of my talk. So, just a quick recap on everything that has been discussed during the past hour. We have different phases of design thinking, and it's very important to have the user in mind because they're the ones who are using the application. So what we do usually in home credit, for example, from the team that I am working with, we do support the customer operations, the customer service operations. The developers and testers from our team um, does not only implement the system, but what they do is that they go directly to the agents, they sit with them, and then they watch them interact with the system. They usually listen when the agents talk to the customers. I believe other teams in home credit are also doing it as well. Maybe there's going to be a session on design thinking, probably hosted or discussed by a UX engineer. So it's going to be a different perspective as well. Um, and yeah, so they also do beta testing. So they get beta testers, they upload the APKs of their mobile application, and then they gather feedback. So these are some of the techniques that are done in home credit. For those from other organizations, would appreciate it if you would also share your design thinking or how you interact with the customers so as to gather requirements on the comments below. Maybe it's gonna be a really nice discussion um, point. And actually, discussing the things or the experience that we have in home credit, you can join us. So there are a lot of career opportunities open in home credit. So um, we have Scrum Master, mobile developers, Java developers. So it's a long list. You can send your resumes on the email address below. So as I relayed, this is just one of the many techniques that we are implementing internally. If you want to find out, you can join us. And if you would recall the slide a while ago that culture eats process for breakfast. So what's interesting on working with the colleagues inside is that the culture is very open to changes and to improvements. So if you have suggestions on the different processes or ways on implementing things, then everyone is very open. You can talk directly to your managers or even to the head of IT. He's been placing his comments here. You can talk directly to him and yeah, give your suggestions, and they would listen to you and look at ways on how to apply your suggestions. And lastly, um, all right. So I've mentioned a while ago, we have formed an organization. It's actually the first organization for business analysts. Pwede po kayang career shifter. Yes, you can, if you want to shift careers, if you want to change or go to a different career path, we are also open as long as, okay, I'm flashing back the screen of the available opportunities with home credit. So going back, we are also building um, a community of business analysts. So if you haven't joined yet, I cannot speak Tagalog purely because we have viewers from different countries. Someone from the UK. So I'm sorry I cannot speak Tagalog right now. But you can place it on the comments below. Okay? So I think a lot of people are joining BA Philippines right now. Yeah, so you can search us in LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you want to be a content manager as well, if you like writing contents, you can reach out. And you are very much welcome to join us. Okay, a lot of people is joining right now. I'm receiving a lot of notifications. Okay, so if you have questions, you can place them in the live chat below. Thank you. Keep safe, stay at home. And if you want to discuss other items, technology management items, you can also reach me in LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Oh, here are the references. I have a habit of placing them at the end of my slides. I will place them everything at the comment section. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. It has been a lovely hour. I haven't checked yet if you have questions here. Do you have questions? Okay, so that's the end of my going to be discussed. Um, it's on Android architecture and MVVM, and it will discuss why is a robust architecture essential for large projects. So this is going to be discussed on the next iteration of this class, and it's going to discuss architecture of the mobile application. It will also contrast MVVM with other architectural patterns and why tests are invaluable for mobile applications. So, hope you could join the next iteration of this class as well. It's going to be for mobile application developers. You could invite your colleagues as well. Not necessarily that you are doing mobile application, but if you're interested on doing so, please feel free to join. Okay, that's all the time I have. Thank you very much, and again, keep safe and stay at home, guys. Bye.